Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, but you can call me Tiff. Today is another tasty True Crime Tuesday, but I actually filmed this yesterday when it was my cheat day. But it turns out that I didn't hit record, so I'm really sorry, but today we're just gonna have the true crime and not the tasty bit. I hope that's okay with you guys, but I mean, the case is more important than the food. So, today, guys, we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. Natalee was an 18-year-old teenager or graduate that went missing, disappeared off of the face of the earth in May 2005. So, yeah, I'm just going to jump straight into it. Natalee Holloway was born on the 21st of October 1986 in Mississippi, which is a suburb located in Alabama. And Natalee was born to Dave and Beth Holloway, and Natalee was Dave and Beth's first child, and Natalee was just an amazing child. She grew up to be an amazing teenager as well. All of her peers loved her. She was really popular with all of her friends. She was just really kind-hearted. I read in one source that one of her friends said that Natalee would always just do the right thing because that's just who Natalee was. Like, she was just so kind-hearted. And she was also really, really smart. Not only was she this beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, but she was also so intelligent as well. So she not only did she have the looks, she had the brains as well. And she graduated Mountain Brook High School, that's the school that she attended, with honours, and she was also offered a full scholarship to the University of Alabama. And this is where Natalee was going to go on to study pre-med, so she could then go on further to become a paediatrician, which a paediatrician is a doctor that specialises in children, essentially. So that just kind of goes to show what kind of person Natalee was, really. On the 26th of May 2005, Natalee and 124 of our other graduates flew to Aruba, which is a small island located on the Caribbean. And this seemed like the perfect destination for the graduates. It had beautiful weather for one. I mean, the location was just stunning, like the beaches were amazing, and it was just the perfect place for the teenagers to go just to let their hair down after they've done all their exams. The graduates were staying at the Holiday Inn Resort Hotel, which was located on the beachfront, accompanied by a few other hotels, I believe, like next to it. But this trip was actually all-inclusive, so that basically meant they could eat and they could drink as much as they wanted and they didn't have to pay a thing. And this also included alcohol. Now, I do just want to mention that in Alabama, the legal drinking age is 21. It was then, it still is now. Whereas in Aruba, the legal drinking age is 18, and all of the students or graduates were 18 at this time. So they were allowed to drink legally in Aruba. However, I'm not sure if their parents were aware of the legal drinking age in Aruba. I'm not sure. I don't know if they realised that their teenage children were going to be going to Aruba and were going to be allowed to just drink as much as they possibly could. But I think that's just an important fact, because when you put 124 18-year-olds on a Caribbean island and you say you can drink as much as you want, like alcohol included, they're going to go crazy. And from what it sounds like, the students, they did go absolutely crazy. And I read in one source that it said something like the whole 5 days that they spent in Aruba was just spent drinking and wild partying. Like, there was no break. And what made this even more accessible, I guess, is that the hotel was only 10 minutes away from like the city centre or the town centre, which was where all the nightclubs were, all the bars were, all the restaurants were. So it was really, really easy for the students to jump in a taxi, get to the town, drink as much as they wanted, spend the whole night into the early mornings drinking, and then make their way back to the hotel. And that's pretty much what they did for the whole 5 days. They almost made like a routine, I guess. So they would get up in the morning and then they would chill by the beach, chill by the pool, just like catch a tan throughout the day. And then during the evening, they'd go back to their rooms, they would get ready, they'd go for dinner, and then they would just start partying and start drinking heavily. Like, when I say heavily, I mean heavily. And they would do this until the early hours of the morning. They would go back to the hotel, they'd go to sleep, and they'd wake up in the morning and they'd do it all over again. And this is what they did for the whole 5 days. And this was the plan for the 29th of May as well. The teens were going to chill out by the pool, by the beach, until the evening. They'd go back to the rooms, they were going to get ready and go out for drinks. And that's what they did. And then around 9:30 at night, Natalee actually was with a group of girls, and they went to the casino that's located in the Holiday Inns. It was on the 2nd floor. So they decided to go to the casino first for a few drinks, and you can actually see CCTV of Natalee in the casino, and you can see the girls just walking about, like wandering around the casino. And then eventually they ended up at a blackjack table where they sat down and they were playing blackjack. But from what I can tell, they weren't very good at it. They were losing a lot of their money. And this is where they met Joran. Now, Joran introduced himself as a 19-year-old student from Holland that was on vacation, and he basically said to the girls, look, I can give you some tips on kind of how to win your money back because you're doing really badly right now. So obviously the girls are like, oh, yes, please, can you help us win our money back? And that's exactly what he did. I think for about half an hour he was sitting with them, and eventually they did win their money back. So they decided, okay, enough is enough, we've got our money back, let's just leave. But then Joran said that he had to leave, he had to go because he had to be up early the next day. And the girls were saying, well, we're going out later, so do you want to meet us? And at first it seemed like Joran was a bit like, oh, like no, like standoffish, just wanted to leave. But the girls kept like insisting that he met them later. So in the end, Joran said, okay, that's fine, like where are you going to be? And the girls said that they were going to a club called Carlos and Charlie's. Now, from what I can tell, Carlos and Charlie's was a really popular venue within the Mountain Brook High School group. Essentially, it was a nightclub that was located in the city, and the group seemed to really enjoy this nightclub. They visited the venue most nights whilst they were in Aruba, and this is where they wanted to go for their last night. So Joran said, yep, I know Carlos and Charlie's, I'll meet you there later. So Joran left, and the girls stayed in the casino for about half an hour longer. So by this time it was about 10 p.m, and then they decided to make their way to Carlos and Charlie's. So they jumped in a taxi and they got to Carlos and Charlie's about 20 minutes later. So they would have arrived at Carlos and Charlie's at about 10:20. And when they first got there, it was quite busy. It was a Sunday night, so there wasn't a lot of residents from Aruba because they were probably, you know, getting ready for the working week. But the club was filled with the students or the graduates from the Mountain Brook High School. And yeah, they just started drinking, they started dancing, everyone was having a really good time. And then around 12:30 a.m, Joran turned up with 2 of his friends, and these 2 friends were 21-year-old Deepak Kalpal and 18-year-old Satish Kalpal. So yeah, they come, and as soon as they walked through the entrance of Carlos and Charlie's, from what it sounds like, Natalee instantly just went up to Joran and was like, hey, like, do you want to start dance? Like, do you want to dance? Do you want to drink? And then they just ended up drinking and dancing with each other the whole night until closing. So when the club closed, all of the students were kind of told to go out onto the street, and they were kind of like all trying to find their friendship groups or like their roommates to go home back to the hotel together. And Natalee's roommate was looking for Natalee, and she couldn't find her anywhere, and she was thinking, well, where could she have gone? Like, it's literally just closed. And then a few other students said, oh, like Natalee's just got in a car with those 3 guys. So her roommate thought, okay, well, she's got to ride back to the hotel, like, that's fine, I'll just walk back myself. So when her friend got back to the hotel, she checked the room and Natalee wasn't there, and she thought, well, that's a bit weird. So she actually decided to go and wait for Natalee in the hotel lobby till around 3 a.m. But because Natalee hadn't come back, she was tired, that she was drunk probably. So in the end, she just decided to go back to her room and go to sleep. Now, when everyone woke up on the 30th of May, this is the day that they're due to fly home at 3 p.m. They wake up and Natalee isn't in her room that she shared with her 4 roommates. This didn't really cause a lot of alarm because the whole 5 days the students had been bed hopping and room hopping the whole week. Like, regardless if they were told to stay in this room, a lot of them didn't listen. As time went on and Natalee's roommate started to ask everybody, is Natalee in your room? Did Natalee stay with you last night? It became apparent very quickly that Natalee was not at the hotel. And this is when the panic started to sink in, because they were thinking, well, if she's not here, where the fuck is she? And this is when the students decided, I actually forgot to mention, I'm so sorry, that the students were actually accompanied by 7 chaperones. They wasn't actually in Aruba by themselves. There were 7 chaperones, but the chaperones didn't track their every move. Like, there was 124 of them. It would just have been impossible for the chaperones to know where every single one was at one given time. Do I think that they should have checked everyone was home at a certain time? Yes, that probably would have been a very good idea, but hindsight is a beautiful thing. That didn't happen. So the students went to the chaperones and said, look, we can't find Natalee. The last time we saw her was when she was getting in a car with 3 guys. So the chaperones went and checked Natalee's room. All of her belongings were there. Her passport was there. Her suitcase was packed, and so was her mobile phone. But her mobile phone had been left purposely by Natalee because there wasn't any signal on the island. So she just thought, there's no point of me taking my phone anyway. And at first, the chaperones thought maybe she went and stayed with a guy, with one of those guys that she met last night. She'll come back, she'll get ready, and we can go to the airport. The hours rolled by and Natalee didn't show up, and eventually the students and the chaperones had to make their way to the airport because, like I said, their flight was due to leave at 3 p.m. and usually when you're due to catch a flight you have to be at the airport 2 hours before. But yeah, eventually they did leave the hotel to go and wait at the airport. And then the hours rolled by again and Natalee was still nowhere to be seen. So this then meant they had no choice, that they had to board the flight. So it was decided by the chaperones that one chaperone would contact Natalee's parents and tell them that Natalee was missing, and another chaperone would stay behind in Aruba until Natalee was found. So when the chaperone called Natalee's mother to advise her that they couldn't find Natalee, Beth, so Beth's name was now Beth Twitty because her and Dave had actually divorced years ago, and Beth had remarried a man called George Twitty. So they called Beth and they told Beth that they couldn't find Natalee, and I believe that Beth was on her way back from a weekend break, so she was driving home at this point. And as soon as she got the call, she just turned her car around, she went straight to the airport, and she decided to get on a private jet to fly to Aruba because there wasn't any flights and it would have taken like a couple of days for them to get there, and Beth just wasn't having that. So Beth and George got on a private jet to Aruba, and whilst they were flying to Aruba, the chaperone that had remained went to the police station and tried to report Natalee as missing. Now, the Aruban police told the chaperone that they couldn't report Natalee as missing because she hadn't been missing for 24 hours. So I just want to clarify something here, because I see this all the time, that police tell people this, that you can't report someone missing for 24 hours. That is not true. As soon as you find out that someone is missing and you're worried about their welfare, you are allowed to report them as missing, regardless of how long it's been. But yeah, regardless, the Aruban police told the chaperone that they couldn't report Natalee as missing because it hadn't been 24 hours, and also it was most likely that Natalee was off somewhere, drunk and on drugs, partying, and she'd turn up soon. Fantastic police work that is. The chaperone couldn't really do much more, so they decided to go back to the hotel and wait for Beth and George to arrive. When Beth and George did arrive in Aruba, they went straight to the Holiday Inn and they went and spoke to the chaperone, and the chaperone told Beth everything that they knew that what the students had told them. So the last time that Natalee was seen was getting into a car at around 1:30 a.m. in the early hours of the 30th of May with 3 guys, and the students knew one of the guys as Joran because they'd met him at the casino. Beth approached the hotel manager and she basically said, do you know anyone that's staying at the hotel by the name Joran? Like, can you look and check your records and see if there's anyone staying here by that name? And as soon as she said that, as soon as Beth said the name Joran, the hotel manager was like, I know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about Joran van der Sloot. The hotel manager also said that Joran was a frequent visitor to the hotel, and he was basically known for coming to the hotel and hitting on tourists, basically. He would drink with them and flirt with them and then take them back to their rooms, and you can assume what would happen next. And the hotel manager also said that Joran wasn't on vacation, he wasn't a student, and he wasn't 19, he was 17, and he lived in Aruba with his family, with his parents and his 2 brothers. So this was kind of a red flag, because why had he lied to the girls in the first place? Why wouldn't he just tell the truth? And Beth said to the hotel manager, like, can I see the CCTV from last night, just so I can just visualise who this guy is? And the hotel manager was like, yeah, that's fine. And Beth got to see the CCTV, and when she looked at the footage, she could see Natalee and she could see this guy, Joran. So Beth said to the hotel manager, like, do you know where he lives? Can I have his address? I'm not sure if the manager didn't know or just didn't want to give it. I couldn't work that out. But I do know that Beth actually decided to go out into the streets and start offering people money for Joran's address. And eventually this paid off, because she gave someone $100, and I think it was a teenager, and for the $100 in exchange he gave Beth Joran's address. So they've only been in Aruba like 4 hours by this point, and already Beth has figured out the name of one of the guys that Natalee was with. She's found out where he lives, and she's also seen CCTV. I mean, talk about doing the police's bloody job. Like, it's an absolute joke. She's been there 4 hours and she's found out all this information. And by this time, it's like 1 a.m. in the morning. So Beth and George decide to go straight to the police station, and they're like, look, this is what we know. We know where he lives, we know his name, and this is the last person my daughter was seen with. I want to go to his house and check that she's not there. And at first the police were like, no, we're not going to do that. And Beth was like, I think you find that we are, hon, because I'm not going anywhere. I don't think that's what she said, but you get my drift. So the police were like reluctant first of all, and Beth was just like, I'm not going until we go and check that she's not in that house. So in the end, reluctantly, the police were like, okay, fine, we'll take you there. So Beth and George accompanied 2 police officers to Joran's house. Now, when they got there, it was around 2 a.m. And from what I can tell, Joran's mother was on a trip. I think she was in Holland on a business trip. And his 2 brothers, 2 younger brothers, they were asleep in bed. And the only person the only adult that was in the house at the time was Joran's father, whose name was Paulaus van der Sloot. Now, I think it's very important to mention that Paulaus was a high-profile lawyer in Aruba, and he was also training to be a judge. So I just want that to stay with you, because when I read that, I was like, now it makes sense why the police were quite reluctant to possibly approach the van der Sloot family. When they got to the house, Paulaus was the only adult there. So where the hell is Joran at 2 a.m, may I add? Because this would have been like a Monday night. So where the hell was he? I mean, I've got my suspicions, but... So Beth approached Paulaus and basically said, like, is my daughter here? Like, have you seen her? And Paulaus was like, no, like, I don't know who you're talking about. There hasn't been a blonde American girl here. Like, there's no one here. Like, it's just me. My 2 younger sons are asleep, and my older son is out doing God knows what. And Beth was like, well, I need to speak to your son because he's the last person that my daughter was seen with. So Powerhouse called Joran and said, you need to get your ass home now because the police are here and they're asking questions about an American girl. And Joran turned up, but he didn't turn up alone. He turned up with Deepak Kalpol, the guy that he was with, or one of the guys he was with the night prior, that had been driving the car that Natalee had got into. And I just think that's so weird. Like, when I read that, I was like, if my mum rang me and told me I had to come home because the police were there wanting to speak to me, I wouldn't bring my friend. I think it was done on purpose by Joran. I think he purposely asked Deepak to come back with him. That's just my opinion. Anyway, so Deepak and Joran, they turn up, and at first Joran denies knowing who Natalee is. Denies even knowing her. No, I don't know her. And Beth's like, well, I've seen the bloody CCTV, so I think you'd probably want to rethink that. So then Joran changed his story and he said, oh, like, yeah, I do know Natalee. We were flirting last night. We were drinking and flirting last night. But yeah, like, she got in the car with us. We dropped her back to the hotel and that was it. And everyone was like, okay, so you dropped her back to the hotel? And he was like, yeah, like, we dropped her back at around 2:30. And the police were like, okay, but witnesses say that she got in the car around 1:30 and then you dropped her off at 2:30, so what was you doing in that hour? And then Joran said that when they first got in the car, Natalee was insistent on going to see sharks. Like, she kept saying that she wanted to go and see the sharks. She wanted to see the sharks. So they decided to start driving to the beach. And halfway to the beach, Natalee then decided that she changed her mind. She didn't want to see the sharks anymore. She just wanted to go home. So they were like, fine, we'll just drop you back to your hotel. And that's exactly what Joran said that they did. They drove Natalee back to the hotel. They dropped her off. And he actually said that when they dropped her off, Natalee got out the car, and because she was so drunk that she'd fell over, hit her head, and was like trying to get up. And because Joran is such a gentleman, like, such a gentleman, he got out the car and he was trying to help Natalee up, but she like pushed him off. She was like, leave me alone, don't touch me. So Joran got back in the car and they started to drive off, and Joran said that like he turned around and he looked and he saw Natalee be approached by a security guard dressed in all black with a walkie-talkie, and then he didn't see anything else because they'd driven off by that point. So the police were like, okay, like, if that's true, can you show us where you dropped Natalee off, please? And Deepak and Joran were like, yep, because remember, Deepak was there and Deepak was agreeing with everything that Joran said. He was saying, yep, like, what he's saying is true, that's what we did. So they were both like, yeah, that's fine, we'll take you to the spot that we dropped her off at. So the police now believe that Natalee was dropped off at the hotel, and they're thinking, great, we can just look at the CCTV and we will be able to see who Natalee was approached by. And they actually asked Joran to come in, well, they asked all three of the boys, so Joran, Deepak and Satish, to come into the police station and give a formal statement. And Joran's story remained the same, basically. He said that he was at the casino, he met the girls, he gave them some tricks, he then left the casino, he went to McDonald's to get some dinner, his dad picked him up from McDonald's, took him home, and that's when he rang Deepak and said to Deepak, do you want to go to Carlos and Charlie's to meet some girls? And Deepak said, yep, cool, I'll pick you up in my car. So Deepak turned up with his younger brother, Satish, and they all drove to Carlos and Charlie's, and then they got out, they met the girls, they met Natalee, they were drinking, they were dancing all night, and then after the club closed, they got in the car. Natalee got in the car with them because apparently Natalee had asked for a lift, and they said, yeah, that's fine, get in. And then Natalee was insisting on seeing sharks, but there wasn't any sharks. Like, apparently Joran kept telling her there wasn't any sharks, and she wouldn't listen. And then whilst they were driving to the beach, Natalee changed her mind and said that she wanted to go back to the hotel. So they turned the car around, they went back to the hotel, they dropped her off, and that was the last time they saw her. Joran said that he saw her be approached by a security guard dressed in all black, and that's the last thing that he saw of Natalee. That's all he knows. And Satish and Deepak's story was exactly the same as Joran's. Like, it didn't differ. The only thing that did slightly differ was where they dropped Natalee off at the hotel. That's the only thing that kind of was a bit of a discrepancy in their stories. All three of them said that they dropped her off at different places, so that was like something to be mindful of. So because of the statement that all three of them had said about Natalee being approached by a security guard, obviously the police decided to pursue this lead. So the police went to the hotel and they spoke to the staff and they spoke to the manager and they questioned them about a security guard in all black. And all of the staff members, including the manager, said no, like none of our staff wears all black, not even the security guards. I think they wore like a green top with grey pants. But they did say, a few people did say that they had seen two security guards dressed in all black that night from another hotel called the Allegro Hotel. And I think I'm saying that right, I'm not too sure. But the Allegro Hotel was, I think, like the next one from the Holiday Inn. And apparently there were two security guards from the Allegro Hotel that had come to the Holiday Inn and was speaking to a group of girls. And there was also one person that come forward and said that they'd actually seen one of these security guards approach a girl with blonde hair. They hugged, they embraced, and then they walked off. So the police are thinking, okay, we need to find out who these security guards are, because especially the girl that hugged the security guard, they're thinking this could have something to do with Natalee possibly. And they were able to track down these security guards, and their names were Nick John and Abraham Jones. And they actually arrested both of the security guards on the 5th of June, and they brought them in for questioning. And it turned out that the security guard that was seen hugging another female, blonde female, this was actually someone that he'd met the year prior. It was a tourist that he'd met the year prior. I think she was Dutch, and they'd like struck up a friendship and they'd agreed to meet that night. And this lady come forward and she corroborated this story and she said, yep, that was me. So that was like one lead, like squashed. And eventually the police had to release the guards because there wasn't any evidence to indicate that they'd actually hurt Natalee or they'd been involved in her disappearance. So they were let go, they were released. Now, after the police had kind of pursued the security guard lead, they then decided to go back to the hotel and look at the CCTV and see if they could see Deepak's car and see Natalee being dropped off. I really don't know why they didn't do this before. Maybe they had to wait for the CCTV, I'm not too sure. But they looked at the CCTV and they looked at the footage, and what do you know? Deepak's car was nowhere to be seen and neither was Natalee. So now the police are thinking, that's strange, why did you lie? And another really weird thing that happened as well, a DJ called DJ Diablo, he was a guy that DJ'd for a party boat called the Tattoo. And he came forward and he said that he saw the boys drop Natalee off that night. And by this point, the police have seen the CCTV, so they know that that was a lie. So they're thinking, what the fuck? Like, why is this guy lying and pretending that he saw all, like, the guys drop Natalee off? So they asked DJ Diablo, his real name was Steve, they asked Steve to come in and, you know, give a statement. And then they actually confronted him and they said, look, we've seen the CCTV. We know that Natalee wasn't dropped off, so why are you lying? And then Steve was like, okay, yeah, okay, I was lying, but the only reason I was lying is because I heard Deepak telling, like, his version of events. I think Deepak worked in, like, a restaurant that Steve was at eating or something. And Steve had overheard Deepak tell his fellow employees like what was going on, and Steve was, you know, Steve believed Deepak, so he was like, I'm gonna go to the police and I'm gonna tell them that I saw what he's saying is true, because I think the boys are telling the truth, you know, I just want to give them an alibi. Like, Steve, it doesn't work like that, you don't make the law, you can't do that. And then the police are thinking, like, that's just really bloody strange, okay, really weird. Who does that? I would never do that. I'm hoping that no one watching this video would do that. Just make up an alibi for someone just because they thought they were telling the truth. Well, that's not how evidence works. You can't just think that someone's telling the truth and be like, okay, that's fine, on your way, mate. So the police then decided to look at Steve as a possible suspect. I mean, I don't really blame them, to be honest, because his story is sus AF. And they said, okay, so where was you, Steve, on the night of Natalee's disappearance? And Steve was like, me? He was like, oh, I was on the party boat, I was DJing, I was working, and then I fell asleep on the boat, And then I woke up a couple of hours later, I went back to shore and I went and started drinking with my mates, and then I come back at about 4 o'clock in the morning and I fell asleep on the boat again. I mean, have you ever heard such a confusing story in your whole bloody life? And the police actually went to Steve's boss, and Steve's boss was like, no, he wasn't working that night. The boat doesn't operate on a Sunday, because if you remember, the 29th was a Sunday. So he was like, I don't know what he's on about, because he weren't working. None of us were working. Don't know why, but the police didn't look into this further, because I just think it's so suspicious. And apparently all of the bars and like nightclubs, they close at around 2 AM. And Steve said that he got back to the boat at 4 AM. So what was you doing in that 2-hour window, Steve? And he also said that he went back to shore and he went to a club, but it wasn't Carlos and Charlie's, it was somewhere else. He went with his mate. But the Carlos and Charlie's owners said that Steve was there that night. So there's just all these discrepancies, and for the life of me, I do not know why, but Steve was actually released. He was let go because apparently there wasn't sufficient evidence to hold him for longer. I mean, I guess a dodgy story isn't probably enough to keep someone detained, but I just think, I don't know, I just think Steve needed to be looked into a bit further. And on the same day that Steve was arrested, Paulaus Vandersloot was also arrested. And the police did this because Paulaus, like I said, he was a lawyer and he was a judge in training. He was literally the Annalisa Keating of Aruba. He would have been the one to know how to get away with murder. And apparently he said to the boys, if there's no body and there's no weapon, you can't be charged. Like, they will never bring any charges against you. And, well, I guess he was right. So the police brought him in because they thought possibly Paulaus could have been the one to maybe discard Natalee's body. Maybe Joran called his dad and like told him that something had happened, like he'd accidentally done something, and Paulaus decided to cover for his son. But once again, there wasn't enough evidence, they couldn't keep him detained, and they had to release him. At this point, the boys, Joran, Deepak and Satish, they are all still in custody, in police custody. And they are all being questioned over and over again, interviewed, because I think the police were very suspicious of all three of them, especially after seeing the CCTV. Like, why would you lie about that? And during all of these interviews, this is where Joran started to change his story, and boy oh boy did he change his story loads of times. He then changed his version of events to that they hadn't actually dropped Natalee back off at the hotel like they said they did. Joran had actually asked Deepak to drop him and Natalee, so Joran and Natalee, at the beach because Joran and Natalee wanted to have sex. So Deepak dropped them off at the beach, and they like were walking along, and they come to this area called the Fisherman's Hut, where I think literally it is for the fishermen like to sit under. And Joran said that they sat down on the beach and Natalee fell asleep. Natalee fell asleep on the beach and he couldn't wake her up, and because he couldn't wake her up, he just decided to leave her on the beach in the middle of the night and go home. What? So he just decided to leave an 18-year-old girl on the beach asleep in the middle of the night. Right, okay. And then just to confuse things even more, I do think this is important to point out because we just never know. So 9 days before Natalee's disappearance, a woman called Tracy reported to the police that she had nearly been abducted and raped. And she said that she was walking on the beach just after sunrise by the Fisherman Hut, so exactly where Joran has said that him and Natalee had been. And Tracy said that a guy pulled up in his car, he jumped out of the car naked, he ran up to her and he was trying to force her into his car.
He had no trousers, no underwear,
so for you
no
it was
swimsuit.
immediately clear what his intention was?
Yes, he was absolutely trying to get me to his car. And to rape me or take me and rape me.
Thankfully, she, caused up a fuss, she was causing a commotion, screaming, shouting, and she got away from this man. And this man basically said to her, like, don't say anything to anyone or I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill you. And he jumped in his car and he drove off. So that's also concerning, because if Joran did leave Natalee on the beach, what's to say this creepy naked guy didn't come back, see Natalee sleeping, put her in his car and drive off? But the only problem with that is on this night, or on the early hours of the 30th of May, there were actually fishermen at the fisherman hut. I think there were 3 fishermen at the fisherman's hut, and they were just there. And there's actually a statement from one of the fishermen. I'm going to try and find it and link it. And he actually says, like, there was no one here that night.
We arrived just after midnight at the fisherman's hut and stayed there until 4:30. If someone says that he came there with a girl, he's telling lies. It would have been impossible that they were there without us having seen them, unless all 3 of us were blind and deaf.
So they went back to Joran and they basically, you know, confronted him with the fact that there were people at the beach that night, and they said they didn't see him. So Joran changed his story again, and this time Joran said that he didn't know what had happened to Natalee, because Deepak and Satish had actually dropped Joran off at time first, and Natalee remains in the car with Deepak and Satish. So now he's thrown his mates under the bus, because he's just like, oh, like, I don't know what to do, like. And he's like, I don't know what happened to her, you need to ask them. So the police go back to Satish and Deepak and they tell them that. Look, this is what Joran's saying. And they're both like, I don't think so. And their stories that they did change, but they changed to that they dropped Natalee and Joran off at the beach, and that's the last thing that they know. That's all they know. But anyway, Deepak and Satish, they denied this. They denied Joran's third version of events, like, outright. They were like, no, that's definitely not true. Like, that's 100% that didn't happen. And something else the police found that kind of proved that this didn't happen is they actually confiscated the boys' phones, and they had a look through them, and there was actually a text on there from Joran to Deepak at about 3 AM on the 30th of May. And this text said, like, I'm back home now, thanks for waiting up, like, come and meet again tonight. So the police were sitting there thinking, well, if Deepak dropped Joran off, why would Joran then text Deepak to say that he was home? Like, it didn't make any sense. And this absolutely blows my mind, right? Apparently, there wasn't enough evidence to keep all 3 of them detained, and a judge ordered for all 3 of them to be released. I think the brothers were released earlier than Joran. Joran was actually detained for an extra 30 days because I guess the police wanted to question him further, but once again, there was a lack of evidence and he was released. Natalee's family is doing everything. When I say everything, I mean everything. Beth was just unstoppable. Like, she was doing everything like you would for your child, but nothing would get in her way. She organised search parties, she made appeals, she offered a reward. She was trying to get as much media coverage as she possibly could to try and get Natalee's name out there. Like, she didn't give up. She wouldn't give up. And she actually said, like, I'm not leaving Aruba without my daughter, so someone needs to come forward and tell me what's happening. And the reward that they put up was $175,000. $175,000 for more information. And then this was bumped up again to $1 million. Like, that's a lot of money, but no one came forward and no one said that they'd seen anything, they'd heard anything, and the case just went cold. Like, it just went cold for about 2 years. On the 31st of November 2007, all 3 young men, so Joran, Deepak and Satish, they were all arrested again and they were brought in for questioning. And they were only, like, kept in custody for a couple of days, and eventually, again, a judge ruled that there wasn't sufficient evidence to keep the boys in custody. And then on the 18th of December, the case was actually declared as closed. And they said that no one was going to be charged for it, and the case was closed. That was it. They were washing their hands of it. They'd had enough. And as if this wasn't bad enough, Joran reached out to Natalee's parents and he said, look, if you give me $250,000, I'll tell you where Natalee's remains are because I know where they are. So Beth's not stupid. Like, I think we can already gather from everything I've said about Beth, she wasn't stupid at all. And so she went to the police and she basically said, look, this is what he said. Am I okay to go through with it? And they said, like, don't give him the full amount. I think give him like 25,000 and see what happens. So that's what she did. She wiretapped him $25,000, and it turned out that apparently Joran was lying, that he didn't know where Natalee's remains were, but he was just doing it to get money. So because of this is extortion, by the way, and because of this, the police were on their way to arrest Joran for extortion and wiretap fraud. But somehow Joran avoided this arrest and avoided being captured by the police. He hopped on a plane and flew to South America and was like, see ya. This infuriates me because he went to South America and he ruined another family's life. And I'll tell you why. 5 years to the day of Natalee's disappearance. So 5 years literally to the day, on the 30th of May 2010, a 21-year-old student by the name of Stephanie Flores Ramirez went missing in Peru, just disappeared in Peru. And then 3 days later, Stephanie was found dead in a hotel room. She'd been murdered. And who did this hotel room belong to, I hear you ask? Well, none other than Joran van der Sloot. And thank bloody God, the police actually arrested him this time and charged him. And Joran actually admitted that, yeah, he did kill Stephanie. And the reason for this is because she'd accessed his laptop without permission. And apparently she had seen incriminating evidence that would have tied him to Natalee's case, which surely they would have then been able to charge him with Natalee's murder. But I guess not, because there wasn't actually any evidence. That doesn't tell you everything you need to know about Joran. And if you've got any doubt in your mind, I think that right there kind of solidifies a lot of stuff, for me especially. Natalee Holloway was actually declared legally dead in January 2012, and this is because Dave Holloway, her father, actually filed a petition to have Natalee declared as dead. And I think Beth, she pushed back on this, but essentially the courts ruled that it had been long enough and it was okay for Natalee to be declared legally dead. And yeah, to this day, Natalee has never been found. I know that there was a jawbone found in 2010 on the beach in Aruba, and this was sent for forensic testing, but it was ruled that this didn't belong to Natalee. And if I'm being completely honest, guys, I don't think Natalee's body will ever be found. I think whoever harmed her disposed of her so well that she'll never be found. And I think it's also just important to point out that Aruba is like a little island surrounded by the ocean. So who's to say that someone didn't drive out into the ocean in the middle of the night and drop Natalee's body in it? I mean, I wonder what Joran and Deepak were doing at 2 AM on the 31st. You know, I said that the police went to his house and he wasn't there, and him and Deepak were out and about doing God knows what. I wonder what they were doing that night. Oh, actually, no, just one more thing. Joran's father, Paulaus, actually dropped down dead in 2010 because of a heart attack. Like, just out of the blue, just dropped down dead of a heart attack. But yeah, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I'm really sorry about not having any food. I did have a kebab yesterday when I filmed this originally, and it was delicious, if that gives you any joy. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, click the like button if you like this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.